Welcome to the debate. Why would a victorious king who, conquered death itself on Sunday morning, choose to spend the next 40 days walking dusty roads and eating fish with traumatized fishermen?
Right. It's the ultimate paradox of this whole narrative. I mean, the cross is finished, the tomb is empty, the greatest victory in history has been won, but instead of an immediate cosmic coronation, we get locked doors, shattered nerves, and this bizarre extended delay.
And that delay is really the core of our focus here. Because if the work of salvation was completely consummated on the cross, why wasn't that enough to send the disciples out right away?
Exactly.
We are looking at a historical reality where a victorious mission simply cannot be launched by a psychologically broken army?
Well, they were definitely broken.
Absolutely. And I argue that the 40 days were an absolute evidential and theological necessity. When you read the book of Acts, specifically Acts 1:3, it states Jesus presented himself alive with many infallible proofs.
Right, the proofs.
Yeah, this period was an investigative and legal masterclass. It was required to provide undeniable physical proof of a bodily resurrection and to construct the creedal foundation of Christianity. Without this highly structured delay, the bodily resurrection would have been completely swallowed up by first-century Greek philosophical theories of, ghosts or spiritual escapes from the material body.
I hear that, but your framing is, well, it's entirely too clinical. I look at the physical reality of these events through a fundamentally pastoral and psychological lens.
How so?
Well, presenting someone with a cold, hard legal dossier does not magically heal a shattered psyche. A chronological delay was required to cure human frailty.
You're saying it was therapy?
Essentially, yes. These 40 days were intensive psychological trauma therapy. Think about this in modern terms. Imagine handing the keys of a global enterprise to a board of directors who are actively having panic attacks behind locked doors.
Right, they were literally hiding.
Exactly. You cannot simply hand them a legal brief, show them a signature, and say, get to work. They need rehabilitation. I mean, if this was merely about checking evidential boxes, you have to explain why Peter goes right back to his fishing nets in Galilee even after he already knew Jesus was alive.
Good point. But therapy is completely useless if the threat is still real. If Jesus' body was rotting in a Roman grave, no amount of divine patience would cure their fear of crucifixion.
Sure, the body had to be gone.
Right. The psychological healing you are talking about is entirely dependent on the physical, empirical reality of a breached Roman seal. And the timeline itself, it wasn't just arbitrary recovery time. The delay lasted exactly 40 days.
Which is a very specific number.
Very specific. In the biblical text, that number is never merely decorative. It is the definitive metric for testing, preparation, and covenantal transition.
But why 40? I mean, why not an immediate exaltation to heaven on Sunday night followed by the immediate giving of the Spirit to empower them? The urgency of their mission was stalled by their own terror.
Because you have to read this through the lens of Hebrew typology. To a first-century Jewish mind, 40 signals that a massive era of transition is occurring.
Like with Noah.
Right. When God judged the earth in Noah's time, the rain fell for 40 days and nights before a new world began. Moses fasted on Sinai for 40 days to receive the law. Israel wandered for 40 years in the wilderness.
The Elijah at Horeb too.
Yes, he walked 40 days to Horeb to hear the still, small voice. Even Jesus himself fasted 40 days in the wilderness before launching his public ministry. So this is a highly structured, deliberate era of establishing a new reality. It isn't a random waiting period to just let people's heart rates come down.
I get the typology, but the typology works in a vacuum. The mission was stalled by concrete fear, concrete guilt, and frankly, concrete shame.
They were terrified.
Absolutely terrified. On the night of the resurrection, John tells us they were locked in a house, terrified of the Jewish authorities, convinced they were next in line for execution. The cross solved the problem of sin, but someone still had to solve the problem of the disciples' trauma.
And resolving that trauma brings us straight to the historiography of resurrection morning. You see, the religious leaders literally anticipated the stolen body theory.
Right, they asked for the guards?
Yeah, they demanded a Roman seal, which was a capital crime to break, and heavily armed, highly trained guards. The idea that a group of unarmed, traumatized fishermen suddenly overpowered Roman soldiers to steal a corpse is historically absurd.
Sure, nobody credible argues that today.
But the true genius of the narrative's authenticity isn't just the presence of the guards, it's the criterion of embarrassment.
Ah, you're referring to Mary Magdalene at the tomb.
Let me unpack why historians look for the criterion of embarrassment. When scholars analyze ancient texts, they look for details a fabricator would never invent to make themselves look good.
Right. You don't make up a story that makes you look weak.
Exactly. And in the first century Roman and Jewish legal systems, a woman's testimony had severely reduced legal value. In many courts, it wasn't accepted at all.
So as a legal strategy, it's terrible PR.
A catastrophic public relations strategy. If the disciples were inventing a legally airtight case to sell to a patriarchal society, utilizing marginalized women as your primary witnesses makes zero sense. Therefore, historically speaking, the text is authentic, because the writers recorded what actually happened, even though it was highly embarrassing and legally disadvantageous to their cause.
See, if you were arguing this is a legal masterclass, picking Mary Magdalene is the worst legal strategy possible. Your point actually proves my case.
How so?
Jesus was prioritizing the pastoral care of a grieving woman and, the inversion of societal power dynamics over human legal strategies. He approaches a woman weeping in a garden who thinks he's the gardener, and he simply calls her by her name. He just says, Mary.
It's a powerful moment.
It's profound. The man who had cast 7 demons out of her is validating her humanity first. That isn't a courtroom tactic. That is divine empathy.
Well, empathy doesn't negate calculation. The interactions were highly calculated to reconstruct a shattered theological worldview.
You mean like retraining them?
Exactly. A perfect example of this intellectual reconstruction is the road to Emmaus.
Oh, the Emmaus Road. You have 2 disciples, Cleopas and his companion, walking 11 kilometers away from Jerusalem. They are literally turning their backs on the epicenter of the faith.
They were giving up?
And they utter one of the most devastating phrases in the entire text. They say, "We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." The hope is in the past tense. It died on Friday.
Right.
Then Jesus walks right up beside them, but their eyes are kept from recognizing him. Now, if you are trying to prove the resurrection, why hide your identity? I mean, why not just show them your radiant glory? Instantly cure their crushing sadness and be done with it.
Because a visual miracle wouldn't fix their broken theology. If he flashes his resurrected glory, sure, they are thrilled, but they still don't understand the mechanism of the cross.
What do you mean by the mechanism of the cross?
Well, to a first-century Jew, a crucified Messiah was a complete oxymoron. It was a contradiction in terms. Deuteronomy says that anyone hung on a tree is cursed by God.
Right, the Messiah was supposed to be a conqueror.
Exactly, a conquering king who expelled the Romans, not a criminal who was tortured to death by them. If Jesus just proves he is alive, they will think the cross was a terrible mistake that God barely managed to reverse.
So he has to explain it to him first.
Jesus had to use that walk to meticulously explain the Old Testament messianic scriptures. He had to walk them through Psalm 22, detailing the pierced hands and feet.
And Isaiah 53.
Yes, unpacking Isaiah 53, explaining why the suffering servant had to be crushed for their iniquities.
He even traces it all the way back to Genesis 3:15, right? The seed of the woman crushing the serpent's head while having his own heel struck, plus the sacrifice at Moriah, the bronze serpent.
He had to systematically prove that the cross wasn't a deviation from the plan. It was the exact center of the plan. Think of it like forcing a physicist to unlearn a fundamental law of gravity.
Wow, that's a massive paradigm shift.
Huge. These disciples had to be entirely retrained to see suffering and death as the actual mechanism of victory. That massive intellectual and scriptural foundation is what caused their hearts to burn within them.
The intellectual foundation was laid on the road, sure. But notice when the burning hearts culminated. It wasn't during the academic lecture about Isaiah.
When he broke the bread.
Exactly. Their eyes were opened when he sat at the table and broke the bread. The theological retraining only fully clicked in the context of intimate relational communion.
That's a fair distinction.
We see this tension between your demand for physical proof and my focus on emotional reality even more starkly when they run back to Jerusalem. They find the disciples hiding behind locked doors.
And the locked room is the definitive anchor for the physical case. Jesus appears in the middle of a sealed room. Their immediate reaction is terror. They think they are seeing a spirit.
Which is a completely natural reaction.
Of course. But Jesus doesn't offer a pastoral platitude here. He demands physical verification. He tells them to touch his hands and feet. And then he asks for something to eat, and he eats a piece of roasted fish right in front of them.
Just to prove he isn't a hallucination.
Much more than that, actually. This is the absolute defeat of Docetism.
Docetism. Right. The Greek philosophy.
Yes. Docetism was a rampant early heresy. The Greeks believed that matter was inherently evil, gross, and decaying, while the spirit was pure and divine.
So the goal was to escape the body.
The ultimate goal of religion was to escape the physical body. Therefore, the idea of God taking on physical flesh, let alone returning to a physical body complete with a digestive tract, was repulsive to a first-century academic mind.
Because it dragged the divine down into the dirt?
Exactly. The Docetics claimed Jesus only seemed to have a physical body. If Jesus ascends immediately on Sunday morning without eating that fish, Docetism wins. The disciples would have concluded it was merely a spiritual vision.
So the fish was essential evidence.
By eating the roasted fish, Jesus anchors the Christian faith in the material world. The physical body matters. This establishes the creedal evidence Paul documents 20 years later in 1 Corinthians 15, listing living eyewitnesses who could be cross-examined. This was a verifiable physical reality.
Well, the apologetic value of the roasted fish is undeniable. But let's look at Thomas in that same locked room a week later.
Okay.
The purely academic framing of Thomas as some sort of proto-empiricist demanding scientific peer review is completely wrong.
How is it wrong? Thomas explicitly demands physical evidence. He says, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe."
Right.
That is a scientific standard of proof.
It sounds like a scientific standard, I'll give you that, but look at the psychology behind it. Thomas wasn't a Greek philosopher doubting the metaphysical nature of matter.
No, he was a disciple.
He was a traumatized friend who couldn't bear to hope again. His demand wasn't arrogant skepticism, it was a psychological defense mechanism. He had watched the man he loved die a brutal, humiliating death.
The trauma was very fresh.
To open himself up to the possibility that Jesus was alive, only to find out it was a rumor, it would have destroyed him permanently.
Even if it was a defense mechanism, Jesus meets his empirical standard.
Yes, but notice how he meets it. He doesn't humiliate Thomas for doubting. He steps into the room and offers exactly what Thomas asked for. He says, "Put your finger here and see my hands."
He invites the physical touch.
And the text implies Thomas doesn't even actually poke the wounds. The sheer pastoral patience of Christ shatters his defenses, and he cries out, "My Lord and my God." That is not the conclusion of a clinical autopsy. That is the healing of a broken heart.
While the emotional component is strong, the confession itself, "My Lord and my God," is the highest Christological statement in all the Gospels.
Oh, definitely.
Thomas leaps past simply acknowledging Jesus is alive to declaring him as Yahweh. It marries emotional healing with absolute theological precision.
But the emotional healing had to happen first. And nowhere is the necessity of this emotional healing clearer than in the Galilean fishing trip.
Peter's regression.
Exactly. Jesus has already appeared, he's proven he's alive, he's eaten the fish, he's spoken to Thomas, and yet what does Peter do?
He says, "I am going fishing."
Psychological regression. He retreats right back to the life he knew before he ever met Jesus.
And they fish all night and catch absolutely nothing, which mirrors the exact scenario of their initial calling years prior.
Right. In the morning, there is a man on the shore who tells them to cast the net on the right side. The net fills, John realizes it's the Lord, and Peter throws himself into the water.
The classic Peter reaction.
Always head first. But when Peter reaches the shore, he encounters a very specific sensory environment. There is a charcoal fire burning.
With fish and bread already prepared.
Yes, but the charcoal fire is the hinge of the entire interaction. Where was Peter the last time the text specifically mentioned a charcoal fire?
In the courtyard of the high priest, warming his hands while he denied knowing Jesus 3 times.
Exactly. If you look at modern trauma therapy, one of the most effective ways to treat post-traumatic stress disorder is prolonged exposure therapy.
Bringing them back to the trigger.
You bring the patient back to the sensory environment of the trauma in a safe context to process it. Jesus recreates the exact smell, the exact temperature, and the exact setting of Peter's greatest failure.
He treats the wound precisely where the injury occurred.
And then he asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" One question for every denial. He forces Peter to walk back through the trauma, not to punish him, but to surgically excise the guilt. You cannot send a man to preach to the nations if he goes to sleep every night hearing a rooster crow.
I mean, yes, the sensory recreation targets Peter's guilt, but you are missing the structural reality of what is happening.
Which is?
That wasn't just a private counseling session on the beach. It was a formal, public swearing-in ceremony. With every "Do you love me, Jesus?" gives a direct command. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep.
He's reinstating him.
Without this explicit, verbal, public restoration in front of the other disciples, Peter's apostolic authority would always have an asterisk next to it.
People would talk.
The early church would whisper, "Isn't that the guy who denied him when it counted?" Jesus doesn't just heal Peter's mind, he structurally rehabilitates Peter's leadership. This public reinstatement absolutely had to happen before Pentecost.
And the result of that reinstatement is staggering. I mean, this same Peter who cowered before a servant girl near a charcoal fire is the man who, a few weeks later in the book of Acts, stands toe-to-toe with the very religious council that murdered Jesus,
boldly declaring that they cannot stop speaking about what they've seen and heard.
That kind of transformation doesn't come from a legal brief. It comes from having your deepest shame confronted and forgiven.
Well, this transformation leads us to the culmination of the 40 days. The texts record 2 distinct, final sequences that often get blended together, but the geography and the instructions are very different. First, you have the Great Commission on the mountain in Galilee.
Right, where he tells this group of uneducated fishermen and tax collectors to go and disciple all the nations of the earth. On a purely human level, it is an utterly impossible mission.
But he prefaces that globally expansive mission with a claim of total authority. He says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." And he concludes it by promising, "I am with you always, to the end of the age."
That's the formal transfer of the mission.
Yes. But then, chronologically later, the narrative shifts back near Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives.
This is the actual ascension recorded by Luke in Acts.
Here, the instruction shifts from the expansiveness of the mission to the mechanism of power required to execute it. He commands them not to depart from Jerusalem. He says, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth."
Setting the geographic roadmap.
And after setting that roadmap, he is physically lifted up, hidden by a cloud.
Leaving them staring into the sky until 2 men in white apparel tap them on the shoulder and ask why they're just standing there.
So, when we synthesize the events of this 40-day mystery, my position remains that this period was the ultimate historical and theological anchor.
The bedrock of the faith?
Jesus utilized this exact typological time frame to transform a scattered flock into an unstoppable force, armed with infallible physical proof, the breached Roman seal, the roasted fish, the physical wounds, all of it built an evidentiary foundation so solid that it could withstand the martyrdom of nearly every man who witnessed it.
And the theology.
Furthermore, he systematically destroyed their broken theology, replacing it with a bulletproof scriptural understanding of the cross.
Well, if you are listening to this and wondering why 40 days matters, think about how long it takes to break a deeply ingrained habit, let alone cure profound psychological devastation. My position is that the 40 days prove God does not send broken people into the world without first sitting in the ashes of their trauma to restore them.
A powerful thought.
Legal proof alone doesn't create martyrs. The patience to walk 11 kilometers on the road to Emmaus, the grace to offer physical wounds to a terrified friend, the mercy to cook breakfast for a traitor, that is what builds an unstoppable force. The 40 days were necessary because humanity is fragile, and the mission required healed hearts, just as much as it required convinced minds.
The texts present a remarkable tension. The rigorous legal defense of a bodily resurrection is woven seamlessly into the intimate, pastoral care of grieving fishermen.
It really challenges anyone to go back and read the end of the Gospels and the beginning of Acts with a completely new investigative lens.
We won't declare a definitive victor between the legal framework and the pastoral framework, because perhaps the genius of the 40 days is that they demand both. As we close, consider the image we started with. The empty tomb was the cosmic victory. The cross paid the debt.
But for 40 days, the king who had just conquered death chose to delay his coronation just so he could walk down a dusty road, sit by a charcoal fire, and eat a piece of fish with a broken army.
Keep questioning.